In a packed Supreme Court, tension crackles as Justice Amy Coney Barrett smirks at Attorney General Pam Bondi's argument. Bondi's piercing response stuns the room, leaving Barrett reeling in a clash that shakes the legal world. The hallowed chambers of the Supreme Court buzzed with anticipation as the case of Meridian Industries versus the Department of Labor took center stage. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens racing to capture every word, while spectators leaned forward, sensing the electricity in the air. At the heart of the dispute was a question of constitutional interpretation, one that pitted the Department of Labor's regulatory power against Meridian's claim of overreach. But no one could have predicted the fireworks about to erupt between two of the most formidable women in American law, Justice Amy Coney Barrett and United States Attorney General Pam Bondi. Barrett, known for her sharp intellect and unwavering commitment to textualism, sat at the bench, her expression composed but her eyes gleaming with scrutiny. As Bondi stepped to the podium, the room seemed to hold its breath. Bondi, a seasoned prosecutor turned attorney general, carried herself with the confidence of someone who had faced down countless adversaries. Her reputation for tenacity preceded her, but today she faced a different kind of challenge. Convincing a skeptical Supreme Court, and Barrett in particular, that her position was grounded in constitutional precedent. Bondi began her argument with a measured tone, outlining the Department of Labor's case. She argued that Meridian Industries had violated federal labor standards, justifying the department's enforcement actions. Her voice was steady, her points meticulously structured. But as she delved into the constitutional basis for her argument, Barrett leaned forward, her brow furrowing. The justice's interruption came swiftly, her voice laced with a hint of mockery. "Counselor, I'm struggling to see the precedent here," Barrett said, her tone sharp enough to cut through the room's murmurs. "You're relying on a rather, shall we say, creative interpretation of the Commerce Clause. Can you point to a single case that supports this adventurous position?" A ripple of laughter spread through the gallery, and Barrett's lips twitched, as if she relished the moment. The jab landed, and for a fleeting second Bondi's eyes narrowed. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she straightened, her gaze locking onto Barrett's. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment palpable. Bondi's response was not just a defense of her argument. It was a calculated counterstrike. "Justice Barrett, with respect, the precedent is clear," she began, her voice calm but firm. "Allow me to direct your attention to Wickard v. Filburn, 1942, where the court upheld federal regulation of economic activity under the Commerce Clause. Further, in Gonzalez v. Reich, 2005, the court reaffirmed this principle, emphasizing Congress's authority to regulate activities with substantial effects on interstate commerce. Bondi paused, letting her words sink in. Then, with a slight tilt of her head, she delivered the blow. "In fact, Justice Barrett, your own scholarship supports this view. In your 2016 article on textualism, you wrote, and I quote, 'The Constitution's text must guide judicial interpretation, but its application must account for modern economic realities.' I submit that this case falls squarely within that framework." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Bondi had not only cited precedent with surgical precision, but had turned Barrett's own words against her. The justice's face froze, her confident demeanor faltering. For a moment, she seemed caught off guard, her pen hovering over her notes. The other justices exchanged glances, sensing the shift in the room's dynamic. Chief Justice Roberts raised an eyebrow, while Justice Kavanaugh scribbled furiously. Bondi pressed her advantage, her voice rising with conviction. "Meridian's actions, Justice Barrett, disrupt the national labor market, undermining the very economic stability the Commerce Clause seeks to protect. The Department of Labor's enforcement is not only constitutional but necessary." She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Barrett's. "The question is not whether precedent exists. It's whether this court will honor it. The gallery erupted in whispers, reporters typing frantically to capture the exchange. Barrett, visibly shaken, adjusted her glasses, her composure fraying at the edges. She opened her mouth to respond, but Bondi wasn't finished. "If I may, Justice, there's another case I'd like to bring to your attention," she said, her tone now carrying a quiet intensity. The room leaned in, hanging on her next words, as the confrontation took an unexpected turn. The galleries, whispers grew louder, a restless hum that filled the Supreme Court chamber. Justice Amy Coney. Barrett's fingers tightened around her pen, her earlier smirk replaced by a tense, unreadable expression. Attorney General Pam Bondi stood at the podium, her voice steady but charged with purpose. "If I may, Justice, there's another case I'd like to bring to your attention," she had said, her words slicing through the room's charged atmosphere. The spectators leaned forward, sensing the confrontation was far from over. Bondi's gaze remained fixed on Barrett, unwavering as she continued. In United States v. Lopez, 1995, the court clarified the scope of the Commerce Clause, emphasizing that regulated activities must have a substantial effect on interstate commerce. Meridian Industries' labor practices, which skirt federal standards, create a ripple effect across state lines, destabilizing wages and working conditions nationwide. "This isn't speculation, Justice Barrett. It's economic reality, grounded in data and upheld by precedent." Her words landed like a gavel, each syllable deliberate. Barrett's jaw tightened, and she shifted in her seat, her discomfort evident to those watching closely. The other justices, sensing the escalating drama, sat unusually still. Justice Gorsuch tilted his head, his eyes narrowing as he followed the exchange, while Justice Sotomayor's lips pursed, as if anticipating Barrett's next move. The room felt like a pressure cooker, ready to erupt. Barrett, regaining her footing, leaned forward, her voice clipped. "Ms. Bondi, you're weaving a compelling narrative, but Lopez also warns against overextending federal power. Your argument risks blurring the line between state and federal authority. Where do you draw that line?" Her tone was less mocking now, but the challenge was clear. She was testing Bondi, daring her to falter. Bondi didn't hesitate. "Justice Barrett, the line is drawn by the Constitution's text and the court's own rulings. Lopez struck down a law because it lacked a clear economic nexus. Here, Meridian's actions directly impact a national market, as evidenced by the Department of Labor's findings: a 12% wage suppression in affected industries across 14 states. This isn't a state issue. It's a federal one, demanding federal response." She paused, then added, "Unless, of course, the court believes economic chaos is a state's prerogative." The room gasped. Bondi's words were a direct challenge, not just to Barrett, but to the court's commitment to constitutional clarity. Reporters exchanged glances, their laptops humming with activity as they typed out headlines. Barrett's face flushed, her eyes flashing with a mix of frustration and surprise. She opened her mouth, but Bondi pressed on, her voice rising with controlled intensity. "Justice, you've written extensively about the judiciary's role in preserving constitutional boundaries. In your 2018 lecture at Notre Dame, you argued that judges must anchor their rulings in the text, not in personal skepticism. I'm asking you to apply that principle here." The audacity of Bondi's move stunned the chamber. Quoting Barrett's own words again, she had turned the justice's intellectual foundation into a weapon. Barrett's hands stilled, her notes untouched, as she stared at Bondi. For a moment, the two women locked eyes, the air between them crackling with unspoken tension. The other justices shifted uncomfortably, aware that this was no ordinary oral argument. It was a legal duel, with stakes far beyond the case itself. Chief Justice Roberts intervened, his voice calm but firm. "Ms. Bondi, let's keep this focused. Can you address the statutory language Meridian claims is ambiguous?" His question was a lifeline, an attempt to steer the argument back to safer ground. But Bondi, sensing her momentum, saw an opportunity to double down. "With respect, Chief Justice, the statute's language is clear when read in context," she said, pivoting smoothly. Meridian's claim of ambiguity is a distraction, one that ignores the legislative history and the statute's plain meaning. "If I may, I'd like to walk through the text, line by line, to demonstrate why their interpretation fails." She reached for a binder, her movements deliberate as the gallery held its breath. But before she could continue, Justice Kavanaugh interjected, his tone probing. "Ms. Bondi, you're asking us to uphold a broad reading of federal authority. What's to stop this from becoming a blank check for the government?" His question hung in the air, a new challenge that threatened to shift the argument's focus. Bondi's eyes flickered, but her composure held. She was ready for this, and her next words would send ripples through the court. Justice Kavanaugh's question sliced through the Supreme Court's tense air, his words a gauntlet thrown at Attorney General Pam Bondi's feet. "What's to stop this from becoming a blank check for the government?" he pressed, his voice steady but pointed. The gallery, already buzzing from Bondi's clash with Justice Amy Coney Barrett, leaned in, sensing a new fault line in the argument. Bondi's eyes flickered briefly, but her composure remained ironclad. She adjusted her stance at the podium, her gaze sweeping across the justices before settling on Kavanaugh. The room braced for her response, knowing this moment could redefine the case. "Justice Kavanaugh, the Constitution itself is the check," Bondi began, her voice clear and resolute. "The Commerce Clause grants Congress authority to regulate economic activities with substantial interstate impact, but it's not a blank check. It's a targeted mandate, bounded by judicial review. This court, in cases like United States v. Morrison 2000, has struck down overreach when the economic nexus was absent. Here the nexus is undeniable. Meridian Industries' labor violations depress wages across state lines, costing workers millions annually. The Department of Labor's enforcement is a precise response, not a power grab." Her answer was a masterclass in restraint and precision, diffusing Kavanaugh's challenge while reinforcing her argument. The gallery murmured, impressed by her agility. Kavanaugh nodded slightly, his expression unreadable, but Barrett, still reeling from Bondi's earlier salvo, shifted uncomfortably. Her glasses glinted as she leaned forward, her voice now laced with a sharper edge. "Ms. Bondi, you speak of precision, but your reading of the statute seems to stretch its text beyond recognition. How do you reconcile that with the principle of textualism, which you claim to champion?" The question was a trap, designed to corner Bondi into admitting interpretive overreach. The room stilled, the weight of Barrett's challenge palpable. Bondi's lips curved into a faint, steely smile as if she'd anticipated this. "Justice Barrett, textualism demands fidelity to the statute's words in their ordinary meaning, not a narrow reading that ignores context. The statute authorizes the Department of Labor to regulate unfair labor practices affecting interstate commerce. Meridian's systematic wage suppression fits that definition, as confirmed by the legislative record and the department's findings. To ignore that would be to rewrite the statute, not interpret it." Bondi's retort was a direct hit, invoking Barrett's own textualist principles to dismantle her critique. Barrett's face tightened, her pen tapping against her notes. The other justices exchanged glances, sensing the mounting pressure on their colleague. Justice Alito, typically reserved, interjected, his tone skeptical. "Ms. Bondi, you rely heavily on the department's findings. What if we question their validity? Meridian argues the data is inconclusive." The question opened a new front, threatening to undermine Bondi's foundation. She didn't blink. "Justice Alito, Meridian's claim is a smokescreen. The department's data compiled over 3 years includes audited financial records and worker testimony from 22 states. It shows a clear pattern of wage theft, with a 15% drop in real wages in Meridian's supply chain. if the court doubts the data, I invite you to review the record. It's unassailable. Her voice carried a quiet defiance, daring the justices to challenge her evidence. The gallery erupted in whispers, reporters typing furiously to capture the exchange. Barrett's expression darkened, her earlier confidence eroded by Bondi's relentless precision. She scribbled something, her movements sharp, as if grappling with Bondi's arguments internally. Chief Justice Roberts, sensing the argument's intensity, raised a hand. Ms. Bondi, let's turn to Meridian's due process claim. They argue the department's enforcement lacked fair notice. How do you respond? The question shifted the focus, but Bondi was ready. Chief Justice, Meridian's due process claim is baseless, she said, her tone unwavering. The statute's language is clear, and the department provided ample notice through published guidelines and prior enforcement actions. Meridian's violation was willful, not a misunderstanding. She opened her binder, pulling out a document. If I may, I'd like to read from the department's 2019 guidance, which Meridian acknowledged receiving. As she began to read, Justice Sotomayor leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Ms. Bondi, you're confident in the notice, but what about the penalties? Meridian claims they're disproportionate. Can you justify them? The question, sharp and unexpected, hung in the air, testing Bondi's ability to navigate yet another challenge. Her response would either solidify her dominance or give the justices an opening to push back. Justice Sotomayor's question cut through the Supreme Court chamber like a blade, her narrowed eyes fixed on Attorney General Pam Bondi. What about the penalties? Meridian claims they're disproportionate. Can you justify them? The words hung heavy, a fresh challenge that shifted the spotlight from statutory interpretation to the raw consequences of the Department of Labor's actions. The gallery, already electric with the clash between Bondi and Justice Amy Coney Barrett, fell silent, every ear straining for Bondi's response. At the podium, Bondi paused, her fingers resting lightly on the document she'd begun to read. Her expression was unyielding, but her eyes gleamed with the focus of a prosecutor, facing a pivotal moment. Justice Sotomayor, the penalties are not only justified but necessary, Bondi replied, her voice steady yet forceful. Meridian Industries knowingly violated federal labor standards, siphoning millions from workers through wage suppression across multiple states. The department's penalties, $45 million in fines and restitution, reflect the scale of harm. Over 10,000 workers impacted, with some losing up to 20% of their annual income. These aren't punitive measures. They're corrective, designed to restore equity and deter future violations. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sweeping the bench. To deem them disproportionate would be to dismiss the real-world suffering of those workers. The room stirred, the weight of Bondi's words resonating. Sotomayor's expression softened, but she pressed further. Ms. Bondi, Meridian argues the penalties cripple their business, risking jobs. How do you balance that economic impact? The question was a curveball, probing Bondi's ability to defend the broader implications of her position. Barrett, still smarting from earlier exchanges, watched intently, her pen poised, as if waiting for a misstep. Bondi's response was immediate, her tone resolute. Justice Sotomayor, Meridian's claim is a deflection. Their financial distress stems from years of exploiting workers, not from the penalties. The department's economic analysis shows Meridian's profits rose 18% during the violation period, while worker wages stagnated. If jobs are at risk, it's because Meridian prioritized greed over sustainability. The Constitution doesn't shield corporations from accountability. It demands it. Her words carried a moral edge, grounding her legal argument in human consequence. The gallery buzzed, reporters typing furiously to capture the intensity. Barrett's face tightened, her earlier composure further eroded. She interjected, her voice taut. Ms. Bondi, you frame this as accountability, but your penalties rely on a broad reading of the statute's punitive authority. Textualism requires precision. Where in the statute's text do you find this sweeping power? The question was a lifeline for Barrett, an attempt to reclaim ground by anchoring the debate in her signature philosophy. Bondi didn't flinch. Justice Barrett, the statute's text is clear. It authorizes appropriate penalties for violations affecting interstate commerce. The term appropriate isn't a blank check. It's a directive to match the remedy to the harm, as this court affirmed in BMW v. Gore, 1996. Meridian's violations caused measurable economic damage, and the penalties align with that scale. Textualism doesn't mean ignoring harm. It means addressing it within the law's plain meaning. She paused, then added, "Your own writings, Justice, emphasize that textualism serves justice, not abstracts. I'm asking you to apply that here." The chamber gasped. Bondi had once again wielded Barrett's own scholarship against her, a move that left, the justice visibly rattled. Barrett's pen froze, her eyes narrowing as she grappled with the rebuke. The other justices shifted, sensing the confrontation's escalating stakes. Justice Gorsuch, typically stoic, raised an eyebrow, while Justice Kagan scribbled notes, her expression unreadable. The room felt like a powder keg, each exchange raising the tension higher. Chief Justice Roberts, ever the mediator, cleared his throat. "Ms. Bondi, let's address Meridian's final claim, that the department's process was arbitrary. Can you walk us through the administrative record?" His question aimed to diffuse the heat, but Bondi saw an opportunity to cement her dominance. "Chief Justice, the record is meticulous," she began, flipping open her binder. "The department conducted 18 months of audits, held public hearings, and issued detailed findings. Meridian had every chance to respond, and they did, with over 200 pages of objections, all addressed in the final ruling." As she spoke, Justice Alito leaned forward, his tone skeptical. "Ms. Bondi, Meridian says the hearings were a sham, skewed against them. How do you counter that?" The question, sharp and accusatory, tested Bondi's ability to defend the process itself. Her response would either bolster her case or leave her vulnerable to the court's growing scrutiny. Justice Alito's skeptical tone pierced the Supreme Court's charged atmosphere. His words a direct challenge to Attorney General Pam Bondi's defense. "Meridian says the hearings were a sham, skewed against them. How do you counter that?" The accusation hung in the air, a pointed test of Bondi's ability to uphold the integrity of the Department of Labor's process. The gallery, already gripped by the escalating duel between Bondi and Justice Amy Coney Barrett, held its breath. Reporters poised their pens, sensing another pivotal moment. Bondi stood at the podium, her posture unyielding, her eyes meeting Alito's with a steely resolve that signaled she was ready for the fight. "Justice Alito, Meridian's claim is a baseless attempt to dodge accountability," Bondi replied, her voice firm but measured. The department's hearings were transparent, spanning 18 months with 12 public sessions. Meridian was given full opportunity to present evidence, call witnesses, and submit objections, over 200 pages, as I noted. The administrative record, spanning 4,000 pages, includes detailed responses to every claim they raised. If the hearings were a sham, Justice, where is the evidence? Meridian offers none, because none exists. Her words were a surgical strike, dismantling the accusation with precision. The chamber stirred, the gallery's whispers rising as Bondi's confidence reverberated. Alito's expression remained skeptical, but he leaned back, his silence a tacit acknowledgement of her point. Barrett, still visibly unsettled from Bondi's earlier rebukes, seized the moment to reassert herself. Her voice was taut, her earlier mockery replaced by a strained intensity. "Ms. Bondi, you paint a rosy picture of fairness, but Meridian argues the department's bias tainted the process. How can we trust a record produced by an agency with a vested interest in the outcome?" The question was a calculated jab, designed to undermine Bondi's credibility by casting doubt on the department's impartiality. The room tensed, sensing Barrett's attempt to regain control. Bondi's eyes narrowed slightly, but her composure held. Justice Barrett, with respect, the department's process is governed by the Administrative Procedure Act, which demands fairness and transparency. The record was reviewed by an independent administrative law judge, whose findings Meridian failed to overturn on appeal. If there was bias, justice, Meridian had every chance to prove it in court. They didn't, because they couldn't. She paused, then added, "Textualism, which you champion, demands we judge the process by its documented facts, not by unsubstantiated allegations." The gallery gasped, Bondi's invocation of Barrett's own philosophy landing like a thunderbolt. Barrett's face flushed, her fingers tightening around her pen as she struggled to mask her frustration. The other justices exchanged glances, the weight of Bondi's dominance palpable. Justice Kagan, typically reserved, interjected, her tone probing but less confrontational. "Ms. Bondi, assuming the process was fair, Meridian still claims the department's interpretation of the statute exceeds its authority. Can you address that?" The question shifted the focus back to the legal core, offering Bondi a chance to solidify her argument. Justice Kagan, the department's interpretation is grounded in the statute's plain text, Bondi said, her voice steady. The law authorizes regulation of unfair labor practices with interstate impact. Meridian's wage suppression, documented across 22 states, fits that definition. The department's authority is clear, and its actions align with this. Court's rulings in NLRB v. Jones and Laughlin Steel, 1937, which upheld similar regulatory powers. She reached for her binder, pulling out a highlighted page. "If I may, the statutory language is unambiguous." Before she could continue, Justice Gorsuch leaned forward, his tone sharp. "Ms. Bondi, you rely on broad precedents, but this court has grown wary of unchecked agency power. Why should we defer to the department's interpretation here?" The question was a new hurdle, reflecting the court's recent skepticism of administrative overreach. The gallery leaned in, sensing the stakes rising further. Bondi's response would need to navigate this judicial shift while maintaining her momentum. "With respect, Justice Gorsuch, this isn't about deference, it's about the law," Bondi began, her voice rising with conviction. "The department's interpretation flows directly from the statute's text, not from agency whim. Meridian's violations are clear, and the law demands a response." She locked eyes with Gorsuch, unflinching. If the court rejects this, it risks undermining the very workers the statute protects. As she spoke, Barrett scribbled furiously, her expression unreadable. The tension in the room was electric, and Bondi's next words would either cement her triumph or invite a devastating counterattack. The Supreme Court chamber crackled with tension as Attorney General Pam Bondi faced Justice Gorsuch's challenge head-on. "This isn't about deference, it's about the law," she declared, her voice a blend of conviction and defiance. "Meridian's violations are clear, and the law demands a response." Her gaze held Gorsuch's, unyielding, as she warned, "If the court rejects this, it risks undermining the very workers the statute protects." The gallery hung on her words, reporters typing furiously. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, her earlier confidence shaken, scribbled notes, her face a mask of intensity. The room pulsed with anticipation, sensing the climax of a legal showdown that had gripped the nation. Gorsuch leaned back, his expression inscrutable, but before he could respond, Barrett interjected, her voice tight with restrained emotion. "Ms. Bondi, you've cited precedent and my own writings, but the court must balance worker protections with constitutional limits. If we accept your view, what prevents the government from overreaching in future cases?" The question was her final stand, a desperate bid to reclaim authority after Bondi's relentless onslaught. The gallery stilled, every eye on Bondi. Bondi's response was measured, yet piercing. Justice Barrett, the balance lies in the Constitution's text and this court's vigilance. The statute targets specific harms. Here, meridians documented. Wage theft across 22 states. Accepting this doesn't open the floodgates. It upholds the law's purpose. You've written that textualism ensures fairness by grounding rulings in the law's plain meaning. That's all I ask here. Apply the text as written. For the workers it protects. Her words, invoking Barrett's philosophy once more, landed with devastating precision. Barrett's pen froze, her eyes meeting Bondi's for a fleeting, charged moment. The chamber was silent, the weight of the exchange sinking in. Chief Justice Roberts, sensing the argument's end, nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Bondi. We'll take the case under advisement." Bondi stepped back, her composure intact, but the room erupted in murmurs as spectators and reporters processed the confrontation. Barrett, visibly shaken, adjusted her glasses, her face pale but resolute. Weeks later, the court's ruling stunned the legal world. In a 6-3 decision, the justices upheld the Department of Labor's actions, affirming Bondi's arguments. The opinion, authored by Justice Kagan, cited Wickard v. Filburn and Gonzalez v. Reich, echoing Bondi's Commerce Clause analysis. But the real shock came in Barrett's concurring opinion. In a rare moment of candor, she wrote, "The statute's text, read in its ordinary meaning, compels this result. The government's authority, while broad, is not boundless. But here, the evidence of harm is clear." Quoting her own 2016 article, she emphasized textualism's role in ensuring justice, a nod to Bondi's relentless advocacy. The decision sent shockwaves through the legal community. Headlines blazed, "Bondi's triumph over Barrett reshapes labor law." Pundits dissected Barrett's concurrence, noting its alignment with Bondi's arguments as a testament to the Attorney General's preparation. Social media buzzed with clips of the oral argument, Bondi's poised takedowns going viral. Law schools added the case to curricula, hailing it as a masterclass in advocacy. Meridian Industries, facing $45 million in penalties, announced reforms, while workers celebrated the restoration of lost wages. In private, Barrett grappled with the exchange. Colleagues noted her quieter demeanor in subsequent arguments, as if Bondi's challenge had left a lasting mark. At a legal conference months later, a young attorney asked Barrett about the case. She paused, then said, "Ms. Bondi reminded us that the law's text binds us all, judges included." It was a lesson in humility. Her voice carried a trace of respect, a rare admission from a justice known for her steadfastness. Bondi, meanwhile, returned to her duties, her reputation cemented as a legal titan. At a Department of Labor event, she spoke briefly about the case, her words simple but powerful. "This wasn't about winning. It was about workers, the law, and the Constitution. We fought for what's right." The crowd roared, but Bondi's eyes were on the horizon, already preparing for the next battle. The case became a touchstone, a story of preparation, meeting opportunity. For the public, it was a riveting drama of confrontation and triumph, a reminder that even the highest court could be swayed by truth spoken boldly. As the dust settled, the law stood firmer, and Bondi's voice echoed as a beacon of justice.